Could we see a blockbuster trade between the Vancouver Canucks and the Arizona Coyotes? It sounds like the Canucks are pushing hard for Oliver Ekman-Larsson. The Coyotes apparently are also making players like Rannta and Keller available. Plus, we have some updates on Bobby Ryan and the Washington Capitals. We'll discuss all the latest news coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now before we get into the big news of the day, the Canucks pushing hard for OEL. There's also the Bruins in the mix on that as well. A couple other smaller tidbits here to get through first. The Washington Capitals are really interested in bringing back defenseman Brendan Dillon, who they brought in as a rental player from the San Jose Sharks at the NHL trade deadline. They would really like to re-sign him, but are trying to move out some additional money so they have more cap flexibility in order to make that happen. Now, if you take a look at their cap space, they're actually not in too bad a shape. They have around $9 million. They don't have a lot of players to sign unless they want to bring in a more experienced backup for Samsonov. Obviously, at this point, it looks as though Braden Holtby's definitely leaving town. There's no way they can squeeze him in as well as make other additions to the roster, bring back other players. So if Holtby leaves, they do have Phoenix Copley under contract as well, who could be the backup goalie for Samsonov. Or they could dip into the free agent market, maybe bring in somebody with a little bit more experience to be that other number 2 goaltender with Samsonov. Hard to say what they do, but looking at the cap situation doesn't look too bad, but then hearing that they want to move money out, obviously they have some other moves planned. So if you look at their roster and who they could move out, you're probably looking at players like maybe a Richard Panik, maybe a Garnet Hathaway, maybe a Carl Hagelin, like somebody who would be more of a bottom 6 role and wouldn't have that trade protection. I don't see them looking to move out anybody of too significant importance to the team. Obviously, wouldn't be a bigger contract, so those would be the most likely ones. But obviously, Brendan Dillon is a defenseman who's going to get a lot of attention on the free agent market. In my opinion, if you look around at the free agent list, there's not a ton of really solid defensemen who, especially that can play physical, like his style of play. There are some others out there, but it's not like the market's flooded by any means like we have with goaltenders. So I think he'd be a player that's high in demand, and the Caps are trying to get their business taken care of here first before free agency hits, and they could end up losing him here for nothing. Now, another update on Bobby Ryan, who is now a free agent after being bought out by the Ottawa Senators. We had reports that he might be looking to go to the Philadelphia Flyers. Now, of course, that's just his preference, I guess. He was interviewed by multiple media outlets since the buyout's taken place, and he did say that if the Philadelphia Flyers came calling, that they'd be right at the top of his list because they are technically his hometown team. He's been linked to the Flyers for years, but of course that never came to be. I know when he was being traded from Anaheim and all those trade rumors were circulating around him there, that the Flyers were linked to him, and I think they probably did check in and maybe consider making it happen, but I'm not sure they ever really got overly close to making the deal take place. Obviously, he ended up in Ottawa for 7 years, and now here we are all that time later as a free agent. So obviously he's interested in going home if that opportunity exists, but taking a look at the Flyers roster and how good of a team they are, I'm not really sure they really have room for somebody like him, but I guess we'll see. But the other thing I found very interesting today, and I don't know if it's something that is just strictly, a coincidence or what it is, but the Anaheim Ducks social media accounts, like the Twitter account, I'm not sure if they've had it on other platforms, had like a Bobby Ryan tribute. And there was certainly a lot of people questioning whether or not they had some kind of inside information. Maybe he has a reunion with his former team in Anaheim. I don't know. I mean, they're a team that's in transition. They're a team that's expected to go through a bit of a retool or rebuild here. Maybe he could come back and have some more magic with Ryan Getzlaf. Getzlaf has certainly played a big role in his early development as well. So, interesting to see. Maybe there's nothing to that, but I just found it interesting that a team he's no longer affiliated to decided to put up that tribute on their social media. So I guess we will see if anything develops there. And Kevin Kurz, the beat writer for the Sharks and the Athletic, also reported that he felt that the Sharks would be a good spot for him. They could certainly use a right winger. He would not come overly expensive, and there could be a fit there. So he could certainly end up in California. He could certainly end up at home in Philly if they're interested. I know that would probably be his first choice, but given the long time that he played in California before, I'm sure he wouldn't be opposed to going back if there's an opportunity. Now, jumping into all of the Arizona trade speculation, could we see a blockbuster deal between Vancouver and Arizona, the Canucks and the Coyotes? It certainly seeming more and more likely here as time goes on. We had additional updates today from various sources, including Darren Dreger and Elliot Friedman, both indicating that the Canucks and the Bruins appear to be the final two teams that are really pushing hard in the mix that Oliver Ekman-Larsson will consider going to. Where he has a no-trade clause, he certainly has a lot of control over where he goes. It's been believed that the Oilers and the Flames have both been very much in conversations as well. But right now, it sounds like he wouldn't waive to go there. Obviously, I'm not sure of the exact reasoning, of course, but if you take a look at what is out there for possibilities for him, it seems like the Canucks might be his first choice. Now, the Canucks have a lot of history with Swedish players. They obviously are a team on the rise. They have all kinds of young, exciting talent, and maybe that would be his preferred destination. Now, the reports indicate that the Canucks are pushing extremely hard trying to get this figured out. Now, if you look at the Canucks and the Bruins both, neither one of them have a first-round pick in the 2020 NHL draft, so obviously that would not be part of any trade. Where the Coyotes don't have one either. Many felt they would want one to make this kind of deal, but it could be looking at a 2021 first-rounder, which they also do not have because of that pick was stripped from them from the testing of junior players that they really lost all those draft picks, that controversy. So clearly the Canucks are in a position where they could offer, I think, a really good package going to the Coyotes, but the only problem is they don't have a ton of space, and they might need them to take back a contract. Like, I can't help but wonder, would they take Louis Eriksson, and would Louis Eriksson consider going to Arizona? Because he does have a modified no trade. We know he wants out of Vancouver. That's no secret at all. The Canucks have given his agent full consent to find their own trade as well. But he has 15 teams that he can veto against, and if the Coyotes are on that list and he doesn't want to go there, he can play hardball as much as he wants out of Vancouver. He may not want to go to a situation that he deems to be even worse. So, difficult to say what he would prefer, but that's a situation that would work well for Arizona, in my opinion, because he has a higher cap hit, but not a lot of salary going out. I mean, he has 2 years left on that contract, but a lot of the money's already been paid. So, yes, he takes up a chunk of your cap space, but there's not nearly as much going out in actual physical money, which would satisfy their desire to cut costs and cut salary in the desert. So, obviously, that would work, and that would be a huge lift off the Canucks' shoulders, but I'm not sure if that's something that's being discussed. But as far as the other assets that would have to be involved, you have to think that, knowing that Jake Virtanen's name is out there, you have to think he's included. He's an RFA. He's a young player who can certainly continue to develop, and that we know the Canucks have been frustrated with. You have to think that maybe they're going to want a young defenseman back. That's been what's largely been reported by many NHL insiders so far as well. Who are they going to want? I mean, Quinn Hughes isn't going anywhere. He's off limits, but you can't help but think that maybe Rathbone or maybe Ulevy. I would think Rathbone might be more appealing given the fact that Ulevy's kind of stalled a bit in his development, but he could be an interesting choice. But then again, Ekman-Larsson could be a great role model for Ulevy as well, and the Canucks might not prefer to include him. So you have to think, though, obviously, if bringing in a guy like Ekman-Larsson is going to take up a big chunk of their blue line for a long, long time, that it's going to kind of box out a younger player, so they wouldn't mind giving one up to make that happen. So you think, okay, so we got Virtanen, you get Rathbone, you get possibly Adam Gaudette. I know his name has been out there as well, as maybe being a younger player that teams might be interested in. And you have to think a 2021 first-round pick. Now, the Canucks traded their 2020 first-rounder. Obviously, they got JT Miller. That worked out great. Would they do the same to bring in Ekman-Larsson? Now, in my opinion, Ekman-Larsson's a good defenseman, but I don't think he's worth $8.25 million. I mean, he's not a top 20 defenseman in my opinion, but you can't help but wonder if getting to a new team with a fresh start, some new coaches, being rejuvenated with all that change, and after all the depressing times that he's gone through with the Coyotes, that maybe he could kind of get himself back on track, because it's been about probably a good 3 or 4 seasons since he's really been at his peak. He's 29 years old. He got 7 years left on the contract, so, it's a lot of risk. There is certainly a lot of risk involved, and the Canucks already have enough bad contracts. If this one didn't work out for them, it could backfire. But if it did work out, it could turn out to be awesome. I mean, you got Ekman-Larsson back there with Quinn Hughes and some other younger defensemen coming up through the system. I mean, you can't help but think that it could be an excellent move at the same time. So it's certainly questionable, though, because we don't know the full package going to Arizona and what's being offered. But you have to think that there's multiple picks, including a 2021 first, at least 1 or 2 young players, like I said, probably Rathbone and Virtanen. But would they take a contract, or they'd have to eat some salary and retain a bit to make the numbers work? Interesting to see what happens. But the Canucks are pushing hard. They're apparently the leading contenders, but the Bruins are also in the mix. Now, What would a Boston package to Arizona look like for Ekman-Larsson? You'd have to think that Jake DeBrusk would be part of it. He's a good young player who can score goals as a restricted free agent. No guarantees, of course, but I would think that he would be part of it. Again, like Vancouver, they do not have a 2020 first-round pick, so I would assume a 2021 first, maybe one or two mid-round picks between 2020 and 2021. You have to think maybe a guy like Jack Studnicka would be a top player. As far as a young defenseman goes, maybe Vaakanainen. I mean, maybe they want Brandon Carlo. The Carlo's name has been out there before, but I can't imagine after likely losing Torrey Krug and then trading Carlo and ended up with Ekman-Larsson, I just don't know if they'd be better off. So I really don't think that that's really a drastic improvement. So I'm not sure what the Bruins package would look like, but those are some of the pieces I would think that Arizona would be asking about to explore this further. But so right now, the information we have is that these are the teams that Ekman-Larsson are most interested in going to, and that they do appear to have a good amount of assets that would go the other way to make the Arizona Coyotes satisfied in that aspect. Just the tricky part is the money and the salary cap. So whether or not, like I said, the Coyotes retain some salary, whether or not they take a contract back that's not as favorable, along with some young assets with less term on it, would be something like that. Would the Bruins maybe want to move David Krejci? He's got 1 year left, $7 million, but he does have a form of a no trade. He might be able to veto that deal. That may not work. So not really sure exactly what you do if you're Boston in that regard. They've been able to keep most of their players' salaries a lot more reasonable. They already got rid of the David Backes contract. So, in Boston's case, they're probably pushing more of a salary retention, I would think. But that's just my takes on that. Now, staying with Arizona, we got word from multiple NHL insiders that there could be other players available, including Clayton Keller. Clayton Keller is, I would say, it's fair to say, their top offensive forward. Had a solid 60-plus point rookie campaign. Dipped down to, I think it was around 44, 45 his sophomore season. Maybe he had a bit of a sophomore jinx there, like many players seem to have. But the way the Coyotes play and just the way the whole system works and everything, they're just not an overly offensive team. And I honestly think Clayton Keller would be an interesting player if he was in a different team with a different system where he could kind of freewheel a little bit more. I mean, if Keller is available, a lot of teams are going to probably be scared off by the contract. And obviously, they signed him to a mega long-term deal over $7 million. And, based on 65-point production with a player who's likely going to continue to develop and hasn't peaked yet, that could prove to be a very valuable contract as much as 1 or 2 years down the road. But, there's not a lot of teams with that kind of cap space. But at the same time, depends on what Arizona's willing to take back. They'd have to take some money. But Keller is a player who could certainly be a bit of a game changer. I'm not sure that he's dynamic enough to be the team's top player, the top offensive weapon, but he certainly would be kind of like what I called Phil Kessel before. He's a great complementary piece. At least at this stage of his career, could he develop into being a really solid number one center who can be a game changer for a team? Maybe, but I'm not convinced of that here just yet. But like I said, I'd like to see him in a different environment, under a different coaching staff, with a different style of play, and see if those offensive capabilities can really come out that much more, and maybe he can take his numbers up a significant amount. So, you're looking at teams like Ottawa or Detroit. Like, they're teams that would have lots of cap space, and they'd have lots of young assets and lots of draft picks. So, they have a need at the center position where he plays. So, hard to say exactly what's available there. But the fact that he's even available tells me how rough a shape the Coyotes situation is. We had heard previously there was pretty much all players over the age of 25, but now that seems to be a little different because Keller's clearly not that old now. And when it comes to goaltending, we're hearing that Darcy Kuemper might not be traded after all. It might be more likely that Antti Raanta gets moved, mainly because the goaltending market is so saturated. There's so many goaltenders that are free agents or on the trade block that the value just isn't there. And even though Darcy Kuemper would certainly get lots of interest, they'd have no problem trading him. They might not just be getting the offers that they feel are really what they need to justify moving him. And then if they can move Rannta, he would be the goalie they'd be willing to sell lower on to get less of a return back because of the fact he's been injured so much. And, obviously he's not quite as valuable right now, at least, as Darcy Kuemper. So we could see a little swap there in what goaltender gets moved for the Coyotes. But at the same time, with all the other goalies that are out there, except between free agency and trades, how much interest is there going to be in Rannta? Kuemper has been, a phenomenal story in Arizona the past 2 years. with a great contract, and if he can continue to play like that for $4 to $5 million, teams are going to be outbidding each other trying to get this guy on their team. Whereas Rannta, if they want to sell low and be willing to take a lesser amount back just to move the contract, they can probably do that because there's going to be enough teams that are kind of playing that goaltending carousel, as I mentioned. So we'll see what happens, but it seems as though those Coyotes fire sale that Elliot Friedman first reported on back a number of weeks ago, it seems to be back on. Trade talks seem to be heating up. Obviously, we're not that far away from free agency now. The season is done. We have about 8 days to go here before the silly season kicks in. And it looks as though some of these crazy trade talks are taking place, and we could see some significant movement here in the coming days. So let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content. And give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.